So the first thing I want to do is talk a little bit about the opportunity zones that sit within the City of Warrensville Heights. I also have a printout of it, so for anyone who's interested in taking a closer look, at the end, we can do some sidebars here. Warrensville Heights has 3 tracts that sit within an opportunity zone. And what I want to do is break down some of those demographics on those tracts. So out of the 3 tracts, we have about 70% of our city's population is impacted within the opportunity zone. The median age is about 39. The median household value is a little over $95,000. A couple things to keep in mind. Out of the 4.1 mile radius that represents Warrensville Heights, 3 miles sit within an opportunity zone. So that's an exciting point to keep in mind. The other thing is that when we look at the zones within an opportunity zone, is our housing market, our commercial, our retail, and apartment buildings. So if you are a developer, a builder, an investor, when we start thinking about what type of opportunities sit within an opportunity zone, Warrensville is ready to go. So this is really an opportunity and a call for action for anyone who's interested in doing business in the City of Warrensville Heights. We are open for business. Let's take a further look. One of the opportunity zones I want to, or tracts within our opportunity zone that I want to take a look at is our town center development. Most of you know about 7-8 years ago, the city put in place off Northfield the anchor of the library and the Y. Now we're ready to move forward with phase 2 of that development. We currently have a little over 28 acres, all represented in the green space here. So this is Northfield. And we have about 28 acres of land that the city now owns and controls that is shovel ready for development. As many of you know, around the corner there is the new Amazon building, fulfillment center. And so one of the things we think would be the first opportunity is for workforce development housing. And so on that map, about 8 acres we're looking at for potential workforce development housing. And that is right behind the library and right next to the YMCA. All right. I want you to think about that for a minute if you are looking to do business in the City of Warrensville Heights. I'm not going to go too deep into any more details about what we're looking to do at this point, but what I wanted to do is I want to make sure that everyone in the room understand that, one, we're open for business. We are shovel ready, so the opportunity costs for developers have been removed up front. And the other thing is, working with our buildings department, we have a very fast permit process. So we're going to work with my office to remove any obstacles that may be before you, but the opportunities are here. And so I'm going to kick it over to Paul with the County Office of Economic Development. He's going to represent a couple slides, and then we're going to kick it over to Yvette, who's going to be the moderator for our panel. All right, Paul? And if you click this way.
Okay, great. Thank you, Drew. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Glad to see everyone made it out here in this cold, snowy weather. I think, you know, the private sector has something to teach us. I work for Cuyahoga County, and we went ahead and basically closed our buildings, but the private sector folks are here and working and networking, so there you go. Congratulations. So I bring greetings from Armin Budish and also from our Director of Economic Development, Ted Carter. Ted, unfortunately, had to be out of town today due to family illness. But Ted wanted to let everyone here know that we are very encouraged by the work that's going on in this southeast part of Cuyahoga County. We appreciate the leadership of Mayor Sellers, Jerome, and the other elected officials and city officials in this region. There's really a lot happening here. It's very vital, and we're glad to see it. So I have two messages today about the work we do at Cuyahoga County. The first is we care about the whole county, not just the city of Cleveland. And the second is we try to base our work and how we spend our money on data, analysis, and rational decision-making. So I just got a couple slides that I hope will illustrate these points. There's a map of Cuyahoga County. Nobody can read that. Don't even try. What this map is here for is to show you graphically the way Cuyahoga County worked in partnership with the City of Cleveland, but also with our suburban jurisdictions and with other partners like Greater Cleveland Partnership, Fund for Economic Future, worked together with these folks to try to make sure the benefits of this new federal tax incentive called Opportunity Zones would extend to the whole county. Sometimes when a program or an incentive comes along and it's got some connection to need or distress, people just jump to the conclusion, oh, that's just for the inner city. That's just for the city of Cleveland. All the money is going to go into the city of Cleveland. And when we started hearing about a year ago about this new federal tax incentive, the Opportunity Zones, we wanted to make sure that this potential opportunity for getting investment in really was available throughout Cuyahoga County in places that made sense. So what we did, and we're going to hear more later about the ongoing collaboration work. I don't want to steal everyone's thunder. But what we did early on was say we want to work with our friends at the City of Cleveland, with our friends at the Greater Cleveland Partnership. There's a think tank called the Fund for Economic Future. Kevin Allen, who's going to talk, was there at the time. And also with our First Suburbs Consortium and suburban partners to figure out where these new tax incentives should be delivered. Kicker was this. The law said you can't put them everywhere. The law basically set a quota for the state of Ohio, said, hey, state of Ohio, you have about 1,200 census tracts potentially eligible. Guess what? Governor Kasich can only pick a quarter of those. So the governor had to pick a quarter. Law didn't tell him how to do it. So, as you might imagine, all over the state, people started lobbying, getting their cases together. We up here in Cuyahoga County said, gee, we think our fair share might be around 70. So rather than just everyone put their own proposal forward, we're going to try to get together with the folks I mentioned and consult with them and collaborate and come in with a group of 70 we think is the best shot. So, what we set in all down here, where we are, Warrensville Heights, up here, Euclid area, bunch of Cleveland stuff, east side of Cleveland, Neal Park, GE, Cleveland Heights there, cluster over the west side of Cleveland here, including Nassau at the county airport. And we tried to use data. So all this, these were all the things we looked at. We got data, we talked to the County Planning Commission, talked to Kevin, some other smart people, and said, what does the data tell us? Where should we suggest to the state that this tax incentive should be? So looking at all the stuff together, rating, and there was some politics, with some negotiations. Again, we came up with a consensus list. Okay, what did the state do? They didn't give us everything. They gave us some. They gave us 64. But you can see for the most part, we ended up where we thought we should be. We got some help down here in the southeast county. We got some help in the northeast county. That's Euclid up there on the right. We even got the county airport in there. We got a little bit of help in southwest county. That's a census tract that wraps around the Hopkins Airport. It includes NASA. So it helps us with an initiative we call Arizona, where we're trying to develop the area around the airport. And a good chunk of Cleveland did get in, mostly where you'd expect, both downtown and then the east side where there's a lot of distress, Opportunity Corridor. But the point is that by working together, we were able to influence Governor Kasich and his decision-making to more or less follow what we thought was a rational approach to where the tax incentives should be delivered. So we care about the whole county. We care about data. We want to be a development partner. We typically work hand in hand with cities. I know there's a lot of developers in the room today, so we encourage you, as you learn more about the way opportunity zones can help your developments to come along, to be working with your local community first, and then they will bring Cuyahoga County in if that makes sense, so together we can help your development succeed. That's all I have. Turn over to the panel. Thank you very much. Oh, and by the way, that's Ted Carter, I think.
Is there an order of seating? Go to sit here. What do you want?
Sure. Hi, good afternoon. My name is Yvette Etu. I'll be moderating the panel. I am currently the president of an organization called Cleveland Development Advisors, which is the real estate arm of the Greater Cleveland Partnership. And I just want to thank the City of Warrensville Heights and the Chamber for putting on this event. This is this is a benefit and a tool that is very important to a lot of individuals, and we just want to make sure that we can get the word out to as many folks as possible. So we appreciate you putting on this forum. So, and I want to say that you really have put together a great panel for discussion this afternoon. You have sitting at the table an investor. You have a tax professional who's been working with opportunity zones for quite a while here, since the inception of the regulation. We have a commercial real estate professional, and then we also have a opportunity zone developer sitting here at the table. So let me just, if you can go down the row here, I'll let you introduce yourselves, the organization that you're with, and just talk a little bit about your involvement with opportunity zones to date. And Terry, can we start with you?
Sure. My name is Terry Coyne. I'm with a company called Newmark Knight Frank. I do commercial real estate brokerage, and I also actually own 3 properties in opportunity zones. One is here in Bedford Heights. We're buying the Mr. Coffee land, which is in an opportunity zone. So I do brokerage and development.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Annette Stevenson. I'm a partner with Novogradac & Company. Novogradac is a national CPA and consulting firm. We primarily specialize in areas of various tax credits and incentives. So we do a lot of work in low-income housing tax credits, new markets tax credits, historic and renewable energy credits. We've been involved in the Opportunity Zone since the legislation was originally introduced in Congress. We host a national working group, so we pull together practitioners across the country to talk about all of the practical implementation issues associated with this new program. And I really am glad to be here today. Thank you for inviting me.
Excellent. Good afternoon, everybody. Let's try that again. Good afternoon, everybody. There we go. Make sure that we're not frozen. So I'm Kevin Alin. I recently started a company called New Frontiers Development Group at the end of last year for a whole bunch of reasons, one of which is no doubt related to opportunity zones and funds. How I see New Frontiers and what we're doing is we kind of sit at the intersection of community and economic development with a specialty in real estate, obviously, and finance. And so where, and I think we'll talk a little bit about the history around this legislation and then eventually how it became statute. But we have a moment here, both in Northeast Ohio and I would offer the nation, as we look at what is probably the largest economic development tool since the New Deal that America's looking at. And so the question that sits before us is how do we make sure, and I appreciate Paul's points earlier around our fair share, but frankly, boldly, we need to get more than our fair share of what we can fetch from both Opportunity Fund investment, but also what we can do to connect those funds to community development. So it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you to the city and the chamber. I look forward to jumping in.
Hello, I'm David Eddy with PNC Community Development Company. We were the first bank in the country to take advantage of the 2017 Tax Act, and we actually formed an Opportunity Zone Fund June of last year and deployed $33 million of capital through that vehicle into 4 different specific real estate projects, and we'll talk more about how we do that. We're reasonably certain that we are far out in front of the curve of where both private equity and real estate equity funds are, which are still in, frankly, the formative stages. We had some very unique competitive advantages within our system and our underwriting expertise that allowed us to get a big jump start on that. And we are currently and very actively seeking real estate development projects in opportunity zones throughout our bank footprint and specific to Northeast Ohio right now. Thanks.
So let me help our panel out here a little bit to know who they should be talking to when they end their discussion at the panel, just to get a perspective of who's in the audience. So just by maybe a show of hands, if you either own or are representing an owner of a business in an opportunity zone, can you raise your hand? Okay, great. If you are, again, by show of hands, if you are an investor or representing investors that are interested in making an opportunity zone investment, is anybody representing investors or have an interest in investing? Okay. Oh, okay, good. Thank you for showing your hand. Okay, great. And I really want to thank Paul for his discussion and explanation of how we went about helping to identify the zones or recommend zones to the governor, because it was all up to the governor to make the determination of the zones that were selected. And I want to just correct maybe a nuance in one of Paul's terminology in terms of where the opportunity zone funds would be delivered, because there's really no delivering of these opportunity zone funds. I mean, we as a community are going to have to work really, really hard to basically attract the opportunity zone investors to our projects, to our zones, to our businesses. So getting the word out is going to be extremely, extremely important to everyone, the businesses, the community, and those investors as well. So again, just to understand maybe a little bit of background in terms of, how this tax benefit, we'll call it, how this tax benefit came about. It was actually probably 2 or 3 years in the process. There was some legislation that had gotten introduced, but didn't make it very far. But it was in the process for quite a while. So I think to really understand what we're working with today, it would be worthy to step back just a little bit and get a perspective of how we are where we are today and what the intent of the legislation and the benefit is. And so maybe I'll defer to Kevin if you can give us a little bit of background on the tax benefit itself.
Yeah, great. So a couple points I think are important as we think about the original intent and history around what is now very kind of topical known as opportunity zones. But in 2015, a group called the Economic Innovation Group issued a white paper. And that white paper was titled Unlocking Private Capital to Facilitate Economic Growth in Distressed Areas. And so then that white paper started getting circulated in Congress, and it frankly had Pat Tiberi out of the House, Ohio rep, no longer there. And on the Senate side, it had Cory Booker and Tim Scott as the champions, right? And so they realized that from the data that underscored and was frankly included in this white paper, there were some really troubling trends. So since the recovery, there was some real uneven kind of economic data points that they were seeing nationally. So for example, we were seeing some of the lowest incidence of new business starts in the last 100 years. So despite coming out of the recovery, we're not seeing the formation of new businesses, and that is a really alarming data point as we look at kind of holistic economic growth with a view for sustainability. So these legislators came up with the idea of launching what they titled H.R. 828 in the House, and it was the Investing in Opportunity Act. And this was in 2016. And so even in that Congress, it was quite surprising to see the number of bipartisan legislators that signed on to that bill. It really attracted across the aisle a number of supporters. However, it got introduced but never scheduled in committee. And so why that's important is that here you had the foundation of a white paper that was quite data-driven and rigorous. You had legislators that saw a path forward on bringing forward a bill, but it never went through the full legislative process and kind of paused like many other bills did during that period of time. Fast forward to the end of that year, and when we're really looking at the Tax Cut and Job Acts bill and that process, during reconciliation, off the shelf came this Investing in Opportunity Act, and through some good advocacy from a select few, we're able to include the key provisions of that draft, initial legislation into, frankly, law, right? So in December 20th, 2017, this kind of early idea of a piece of legislation, without committee hearing, without public comment, became part of the Tax Cut and Job Acts bill. And so why that's important is that Treasury didn't see this coming, right? This wasn't something that had been iterated at a level that had some real kind of insight and guidelines on how they were going to regulate this new piece of law. And so you fast forward, now here we are in 2019, and we are, I think many in the room and on this panel are eagerly waiting for Treasury to bring forward regulations that really help clarify the guardrails of this program. So for that purpose, I would tell you two things that are really points to highlight. One is the recognition that this country has had a very uneven recovery since 2008's recession. And so this was intended to address that by taking capital, which oftentimes gets aggregated on the coasts, New York, your Bostons, your San Franciscos, and unfortunately doesn't always find its way to places like Warrensville Heights or Cleveland, et cetera. And so the ability to attract capital was kind of one of the galvanizing causes of this legislation and now law. Secondly, the ability to connect these types of resources and capital investment to businesses was really one of the original intents that has some subsequently, and I think we'll talk about it in a little bit, this has quickly become a real estate play for a whole bunch of understandable reasons. But I don't want this room to lose sight of the original intent, that this was actually a way to attract capital to come to new and early stage businesses to really create economic growth. And then finally, the idea that this is similar to other programs, but I would offer fundamentally different, because this is a market-driven program. And I even have an issue with that word as a program, because this is frankly a market-driven tool that doesn't have the same hallmarks of low-income housing tax credits or the compliance hurdles of new market tax credits. This is really a function of high net worth individuals and family offices particularly able to take capital gains and at their own discretion and at their own timing, choose where and how they want to bring that to ground. And that isn't a very government-heavy or overly regulated process. This is a new market tool really pioneering and paving new directions that, again, lots to be excited about, but also healthy skepticism in some cases is due until we have a deeper sense of what and where the regulations land.
Okay, just to get to a couple of these slides, I think I should have been flowing through them as Kevin was talking, but this will give you a sense of the census tracts that are actually distressed in the United States. These are the census tracts that were ultimately chosen or selected by the governor's office. You can see they're allocated into various zones. Again, as we work to try to market the region, we'll be using those zones to do that. And then a little ad for Novogradac here, but also they have a fabulous tool that if you're wondering, hey, is my business or is my property located in an opportunity zone, you can actually go to various websites, and one of them is a Novogradac website that you can put an address in, and it'll take you to that address and identify whether or not your project or business is actually in that zone. Okay. Well, I just wanted to take a moment to explain a little bit about Cleveland Development Advisors and what we've done over the years, and how and why we've been following opportunity zones. We've actually been following it for a couple of years, similar to what Kevin had described. This was something that was thought about over 2 or 3 years ago when we were following the policy, because we really believed in the policy, and it has a lot of commonalities to various tools that we use today, particularly the New Markets Tax Credit. And we've been successful in this region and in the state of Ohio to really attract a lot of New Markets Tax Credit to our state and to our region. And so we think we can do the same with opportunity zones. But for us to be able to do that, we really need to understand, how does it work? How is it working today? What is provided by the current tax law itself? There are still, as Kevin noted, and reasons why this is kind of slow in the process to get started because the IRS is still working on the regs. And even though there are a lot of things happening to date and a lot of properties being transferred and being purchased with opportunity zones, there are still a lot of questions out there. So Annette is going to take us through what we know today in terms of how the tax benefit actually works. And perhaps you can note a little bit as well in terms of where are the regs and technical corrections, and where does that stand with the IRS? And I'll give you the clicker so you can control that.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, so I get to talk the kind of nuts and bolts on how this works and the tax code, which is right after lunch, and I apologize for that. But it is important, and is, of course, with anything that gets embedded in the tax code, the rules and the provisions become complicated. And as with any of these kind of new provisions within the code, we find ourselves in a situation with probably more questions than answers. But we'll at least talk through today what we know, what some of those fundamental issues are, where current regulations sit, and what we expect in terms of timing with respect to finalizing regulations. So the basic tool that we've been talking about today, we know where the zones are. We've talked about that. We've talked about how those came about in Northeast Ohio. But generally speaking, taxpayers who have capital gains can defer the tax on those capital gains by making investments in qualified funds called qualified opportunity funds. And then qualified opportunity funds are required to do certain things with those dollars. So these are cash investments. They come with a deferral of tax, and we'll talk about that as well. But the qualified opportunity funds then use those dollars to invest in what is called qualified opportunity zone property. There are a lot of acronyms and that go along with this program, so you'll hear and see some of that today. There's also a lot of rules that go along with every one of those acronyms. So we'll kind of touch on that at a high level and try to get through some of the basics. But essentially, the incentive provides really three benefits. One is a gain deferral. So I mentioned that you can take an investor can take a capital gain that otherwise would be taxable and defer that gain into the future. So there's no current tax paid on that gain. In addition, if the investor holds that investment for a certain period of time, there is a portion of even that initial gain that can be permanently deferred. And then probably the biggest benefit for investors in this program is if an investor holds an investment in a qualified opportunity fund for 10 years and then ultimately sells it, any appreciation, so not the initial gain, but any appreciation over and above that initial gain, additional gain on that investment over time is permanently eliminated. So they never have to pay tax on that. So that's probably the biggest bang for your buck as an investor, but there are certainly other incentives along the way. So the way the actual initial gain deferral works is that the period of deferral is when you defer, you elect to make this deferral, and you do that by tax election on particular tax forms. You will be required to pick up that gain that you defer the earlier of selling that investment. So if you make an investment and you sell it before December 31st, 2026, at the date of sale, you would then pick up the gain that you deferred. Or there's a hard date in the law that is December 31st, 2026. So December 31st, 2026 comes, that initial tax that you deferred, as an investor, you pay the tax. At that time, the calculation of the gain deferred really depends on the fair value of your investment at that time. So there is a possibility that if you make an investment that declines in value by 2026, you may not ever pay the full tax on that initial deferred gain. So there is a little bit of a possibility that depending on the value at the time, and you'd be subject to an appraisal, et cetera, but depending on the value at the time, you may or may not pay the full gain. But presumably, if it's a good investment, things go well, you get to that point and you're going to pay tax. But there are some other, I mentioned the partial sort of forgiveness along the way. So if an investor holds the investment for 5 years, there is a 10% of that gain becomes permanently deferred. So they basically do this through what they call a basis adjustment. So because you're deferring a gain that you never paid tax on, from a tax perspective, you're deemed to have zero basis in that investment. After 5 years, you get a 10% basis boost, which essentially means that 10% of that gain is permanently deferred. So that's a permanent sort of forgiveness on the gain. If you hold the investment another 2 years, there's another 5% kicker. So that takes you to essentially, and then do I hit my, okay. Essentially, 15% of that total gain being permanently deferred, you're only going to be subject to paying tax on 85% of that original investment that you made, that original gain that you invested. And then if you hold the investment longer, greater than 10 years, at the time you sell, any additional gain that you would have otherwise recognized on the investment by selling the investment, so over and above that initial deferral, is permanently deferred. So as I mentioned, that's kind of the biggest boost in this program, is if investing in properties or investing in businesses that do appreciate in value, and ultimately staying in for that 10-year hold period and permanently eliminating gain on all of that investment. So Qualified Opportunity Fund is really at the crux of this whole program. This is really the key to how this works. So a Qualified Opportunity Fund is an entity. It's an investment vehicle that is established. It needs to be a partnership or a corporation for tax purposes, and it's basically established to serve as a Qualified Opportunity Fund and accept investments, these deferred gain investments. The primary rule for those funds is that 90% of its assets need to be invested in what is called Qualified Opportunity Zone property. And we'll talk about what that is, but the fund essentially has to invest in certain things, and it has to invest a very, very high percentage of its capital in qualifying assets. One issue that I wanted to point out here, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the underlying investments and the rules associated with those, but at a Qualified Opportunity Fund level, 90% of those assets need to be invested, and they need to be invested within a particular timeline. And we'll talk a little bit about that, but there's no safe harbor right now within the IRS rules that allows a fund to basically hold cash for any reasonable period of time. So it's one of the things that, as we look at the practical implementation of this incentive, that as an industry, we've pointed out to the IRS and we've urged them to provide some regulations that allow a bit of a safe harbor, a little bit of a runway for funds to invest the proceeds that they receive from these gains into qualified property. The certification process is pretty straightforward. I probably won't spend a lot of time here, but when Treasury put this program into play, they really wanted to make it fairly straightforward as these things go. And so if you're familiar with some of the other programs like the New Markets Tax Credit Program, which is laced with applications and a tremendous amount of reporting and certification process, they've sort of stripped all of that away in this program. So Qualified Opportunity Funds can self-certify. They determine when they become a Qualified Opportunity Fund. So they're trying to keep at least that level of the reporting at a minimum to really encourage this investment to flow into these communities. So the 90% test that I mentioned, this is something when the regulations did come out. So there's a first tranche of regulations that was issued that provided some guidance to all of us. And it was some favorable guidance and some guidance that I think is really helpful. This is one area that they provided some very explicit guidance, may or may not be super helpful, and this was what I was referring to with this timeline of investing. So qualified opportunity funds that have to hold 90% of their assets in qualified property are subject to some very strict timeline requirements. So essentially, they have to take the average of 2 points in the year test on an annual basis. That's if it's a 12/31 taxpayer, a year-end calendar year taxpayer, that's going to be June 30th and December 31st. They'll look at the assets on their balance sheet, take the percentage, take the average, and calculate whether that exceeds 90%. As long as the qualified assets exceed 90%, they pass. But in the first year, when an investor makes an investment into a fund, there's basically, if you make an investment prior to, and I'm just going to use a calendar year taxpayer because it's easier, but if you make an investment prior to June 30th, so the Qualified Opportunity Fund takes the investment in, you basically 6 months from that date will be your first testing date. So if the money comes in April, it's basically going to be a September 30th first testing date, and then you're automatically subject to a December 31st second testing date, and you take that average. So it's a very, very short time frame from the time the investment is made until the first testing date happens that the Qualified Opportunity Fund has in order to invest in qualified property. If that investment comes in the second half of the year, you're just subject to the hard date of 12/31. And so when you think about timing of situations, maybe investments in the fourth quarter, for example, you have a very, very short lead time in order to be able to pass the test. So this is an area that we've asked for some relief on with the IRS. We're really hopeful that they will provide some in another tranche of regulations, some ability for funds to have a practical timeline for making these investments. So I mentioned that the Qualified Opportunity Fund has to invest in certain property, and there's really three types of property that qualify. One would be stock in a Qualified Opportunity Fund business, and that's another whole definition that we'll talk about. One is a partnership interest in a Qualified Opportunity Zone business, and then the other is Qualified Opportunity Zone property. And we'll kind of touch on these areas. So stock and partnership interest. So think about the fund takes in an investment from an investor, has to deploy that rather quickly. Probably the most common thing that I think we'll see are acquisitions of partnership interest, possibly stock ownership of what's then called a Qualified Opportunity Fund business. Those investments need to be acquired after December 31st, 17. They need to be invested in businesses that qualify as Qualified Opportunity Zone businesses or are formed to intend to qualify. And they must, for substantially all of the holding period of the fund's investment in that business, the business must qualify. So Qualified Opportunity Zone businesses are, from an investment standpoint, so you think the fund, this in an example where the fund acquires a partnership interest in a business, and that business is intended to qualify. So basically, it's a business located in the zone. We've talked a lot about the zones today, so it's a business located in an opportunity zone that meets certain requirements. So in order to qualify as a qualified business, and those of you that are in the room that have development projects or businesses located in the zone, this would be important for you because these are all the rules that you have to pass in order to be a qualified business to take this investment in. And the key provisions are at least 50% of the gross income derived by the business needs to be derived from the active conduct of a business. The regulations that came out added in a Qualified Opportunity Zone. So that was not in the statute, it was not in the law. Initially, the only thing in the law was that 50% of you had to have 50% active income derived from the active conduct of business. It was silent with respect to where that business is generated. The regulations added in a Qualified Opportunity Zone. And this provision in and of itself probably has halted a lot of investment in operating companies right now because there really isn't any guidance as to how do you determine where your revenue is derived. So if you have employees all over the country or you use contractors or you maybe manufacture in other facilities but you have a headquarters located in a Qualified Opportunity Zone, where is your revenue really being derived? It's a question. There aren't answers, but I did want to mention that there are a lot of comments that have gone into Treasury based on this first tranche of regulations. We are in the middle of a comment period. The vast majority of those have addressed this and have asked them to take that provision out, including a letter that went in from the key congressional offices, both from the Senate and the House, that put a letter in urging Treasury to fix certain provisions of these regulations, this being one of them. So I think there's some hope that this will get corrected, but as of today, that's the way the regulations were worded. And then intangible property, if you have intangible property, it has to be in the active conduct of a business in a qualified opportunity zone. And then the less than 5% of the assets of the business can be in what's called non-qualified financial property. So that would be if the business owned significant investments, excess cash, those types of things. It also, the business can't be what we sometimes refer to as a sin businesses. So you see the list up here, depending on where you sit. This, you may consider these the fun businesses, but these are the businesses that by themselves don't qualify for investment. Yeah. And those are consistent with what we see in the New Markets Tax Credit Program as well, and a number of other federal programs. Qualified Opportunity Zone business properties. So one of the key provisions of meeting the test of being a qualified business is that substantially all of the tangible property of the business needs to be located in a qualified opportunity zone. And the IRS regulations that came out gave us a definition of substantially all, which we all felt was pretty favorable. It was a 70% test. There was talk that that may also be a 90% test, like the test I described before, which would make it very, very difficult for any existing business to qualify. So you're looking at 70% of the tangible property of the entity being located in a qualified business. But in order to be qualified property, that property has to have been acquired after December 31st, 2017. So there's also a lot of question about existing businesses that own tangible property, and how do you pass this test? How much investment do you actually have to make to get over the hurdle such that you have 70% of your assets as qualified? Because you may have older assets that just by definition don't qualify for purposes of the test. In addition, you have to either the original use of that asset has to be with this entity in the zone, or the entity needs to substantially improve the property. So when you think about real estate, essentially if you buy a building, you need to spend within 30 months as much as you paid for that building in improvements. So they're really looking for investments that are new investments that are going to create economic activity in the form of jobs and other activity, as opposed to just purchasing an existing building and not putting any kind of renovation or dollars into it. There are some key questions and key issues that are still out there related to things like if you owned a building that was vacant maybe and you were prior to 12/31/17, is there any way to qualify that going forward because you didn't purchase it prior to that date? In the IRS regulations, the IRS did ask for commentary on some of these points. So they've asked for industry practitioners to consider and help them consider whether maybe there should be some sort of a grandfathering or a leeway if you owned a building but it had been vacant, for example, for a certain number of years, that even though you owned it prior to this date, it can be deemed to be original use if you put improvements into it and create a productive asset. So there are some questions about this. The black and white answer right now is if you owned it prior, that's a bad asset. It's an asset that wouldn't qualify, but we are hoping, again, for some favorable guidance in this area that may make some things that otherwise wouldn't qualify actually qualify. And this is kind of just a graphic sort of description of what I've talked about in terms of investor needs to invest the money in a qualified opportunity fund. The fund needs to invest in qualified assets, real estate assets, businesses should be able to qualify if they can meet these provisions. But as I mentioned, there's a lot of sort of questions about some of those. One thing I didn't mention at the top that I probably should mention for investors is you basically have a 180-day clock from the time you sell an asset that triggers the gain that you want to defer. You have 180 days from the date of that sale to make your investment in a qualified opportunity fund. So we talked about the kind of time constraints of the fund and its investments, there are also constraints on the investor itself and its timing for making investments. And then finally, I've talked about the initial regulations that came out in October. There was supposed to be a 60-day comment period. A lot of comments have gone into the IRS. There was a hearing scheduled January 10th that was canceled because of the government shutdown. We're seeing that we believe that there will be a, that meeting will get rescheduled for February 14th. So at least there'll be the meeting, the hearing is going to happen. Shortly thereafter, we expect a second tranche of regulations that will hopefully address some of these other questions and concerns. And now there's word that there may even be a third tranche of regulations focused specifically on reporting requirements. So one of the concerns of the industry is if we're making these investments, how do we know they're doing what they're intended to do? What are the community impacts? So we do expect to see kind of a third tranche of reporting requirement regulations. And I think that covers my basic content. It's a lot.
Thanks, Annette. I found it very interesting. Hopefully everybody else did as well. One of the there are a couple of working groups around the country that are working specifically on this tax benefit, and Novogradac is facilitating one of those working groups, and they must have, not sure how many members, Annette, but a couple hundred, because when I'm on the calls, there's over 100 people on the call, but they are doing an excellent job of really trying to coalesce the group of developers, investors, everyone who's interested in this particular benefit to try to get the right answers, the correct answers in the best way from the IRS, so that we can make have the fullest benefit out of this tax incentive. A couple of, again, commonalities and nuances of this benefit. As we look at it, we can learn a lot from the New Markets Tax Credit in terms of how that was implemented, and again, hopefully we can learn from that on how we could use this for more broader purposes. If we look at New Markets, it's been around for about 15 years. Because of the structure and the same language that's in this relative to the 50% of income, was very challenging to try to figure out how you could use that for operating businesses. It is now used for operating businesses, but it took quite a while, and still more than 75% of New Markets is used on real estate. So that's kind of where we are right now with the opportunity zones. We're seeing the second one, I should mention this as well, is that it's very the difference between New Markets and which has been mentioned several times up here, the difference between New Markets and the opportunity zones is the reporting requirements, which is good, which is kind of good and bad. It's easy because if you're an investor, you can make an easy investment and you don't have to do a lot of reporting. You don't have to meet specific guidelines or specific types of impacts. You can make your investment so long as it meets the criteria that Annette just laid out here. But what that doesn't do is it doesn't help you potentially extend this benefit when you're arguing that this is actually, that the investments that you're making are actually making an impact. Because how will you know? How will anybody know? So it's very difficult to tell when an investor is making a investment in one of these businesses. If you make it into an operating business, there's very little ability to be able to track it. You might be able to track a little bit on the real estate. I'm going to tap into Terry's expertise here, but you may be able to track a little bit on the real estate because you can look at the time that the legislation was passed in December of 2017 to today, how many properties are starting to transfer, because there's a requirement that there's a transfer of the property for it to be eligible for this benefit. So how many properties are transferring in opportunity zones? And we're starting to see a bit of a spike in property transfers and property sales in these opportunity zones. So to bring it closer to home and liven up the crowd a little bit, I love you, Annette.
So hard.
But to get it down to just sort of looking at, okay, if we know now that for sure this will be able to be used for real estate, and hopefully more operating businesses will be able to use it down the road when the guidance from the IRS is out and clear. What's going on in the real estate market right now? What are we seeing in terms of transfers and in this market? What are you seeing nationally, and how Cleveland is faring there?
So the first thing I'd like to do is make an advertisement for PNC. If you have land If you have a site, PNC has the best program by far that I have seen.
We're saving him.
Yeah, well, but I mean, I think it's better to get an endorsement from a third party. It's mission-driven, it's incredibly low cost, so if you have a development site, if you're a city or developer, go to PNC, they've got the best program. I think in the country, they've got the best program, and they move quickly. So the opportunity zone, the impact that I have seen, it's interesting because right now as an investor, I can sell a property and then trade into another property using what's called a 1031 exchange. And that's probably the competitor to an opportunity zone because I can go and sell property A, invest in property B, defer my gains. I can also refinance in a 1031 exchange and take my money out tax-free and still own this property. And then upon death, my basis goes up and my kids never pay taxes. So that's kind of what exists right now. And the big thing there is you can sell property A and go to property B and refinance and take your money out tax-free and still own property B. And the opportunity zone is defer to Annette, but I think right now it's not clear that if you invest into an opportunity zone fund that you can ever take your money out on a refinance tax-free. So that unknown right there, I think, makes it easier for people who have just sold their business and they have lots of cash. They've just sold their stock in Microsoft and they want to put it somewhere else. Because from a real estate perspective, you do have an alternative right now. You can use a 1031. If you're selling a business, if you're selling stock, if you're selling your airplane or your watch and you have a gain, you don't have a place to put it. So the opportunity zone has broadened the population of people who can take their money and defer it into another asset. And what's interesting about Cleveland is that I work for a big international company. We're headquartered in New York. They're seeing a lot of activity in Boston and New York in areas that we wouldn't consider to be the greatest areas, but they're perceived to have high upside. So in 10 years, the asset may be worth $1 today, but it may be worth 20 in 10 years. And that's a stress in Cleveland is that your property may not appreciate greatly in value in 10 years. It hopefully will appreciate just due to inflation. But when this program has two prongs to it, one, you defer, so you only pay 85%, and two, you never pay on the increased gain. So this is a great tool. I think in the Cleveland market, it just is another quiver that helps. I don't think it's a saving grace. It also, I've got a property in Warrensville Heights that we're selling on Renaissance Parkway. You really want buildings that are empty, that need lots of work. The property on Renaissance Parkway, great property, needs work, but you have to invest as much money in the building as you paid for the building. You can take out your basis for land. So if you have I bought a downtown building that was multi-story, we allocated a lot of the value to the land, and then the building itself became less valuable. So we're going to allocate as much money to the improvements to the building as we would without the land. So if you have an empty building that has a need for improvements, which I think was the intention of, as an aside, I heard today that the guy who started this program was the founder of Napster. Is that true?
Sean Parker.
Yeah, that's pretty funny. The guy who founded Napster founded this program. So those are kind of my commentary. The impact that we're seeing so far in our market, you can point to specific deals. If anyone knows the Chilcote building on 23rd and Superior, that just sold because the two investors buying it had significant gains. They are then going to spend a lot of money and improve it. I could point to 5 or 6 deals that are occurring right now from out-of-state investors who have their own funds and their own gains. So there's clearly an impact that is happening in the CBD that I'm seeing. Bedford Heights, we're buying land, the Mr. Coffee land. It's in an opportunity zone. We may not even use the designation because we may buy it, fill it up, refinance it, or sell it. So I think that if you've got raw land and you're in an opportunity zone, that's a really easy way to qualify because all the improvements above the raw land qualify as the O-zone. I haven't seen any suburban activity yet, but I've clearly seen a lot of mostly outside money other than the Chilcote deal looking at deals, and a couple are under contract, but there's some clarity that's needed in the regulations. I think this is a great tool. I don't think it's the saving grace. I think, like Annette said, Yvette said, it's added to the new market tax credits, the historic tax credits. It's clearly a benefit.
Okay, you have a business in an opportunity zone, or you have some property in an opportunity zone that you are seeking an investment, and you're seeking opportunity zone investors. where can we find them and what are they looking for? So I'm going to defer to Kevin on this to give us a little bit of a perspective of what's out there. I think when this was originally discussed and the white paper, as Kevin referred to, I believe it had indicated that there were to the tune of potentially $6 billion of capital gain that could be invested in these opportunity zones. So what's going out there in the market? What kind of funds are being established? And give us a perspective of what you know they might be looking for.
Great, thanks. And so the beautiful B turns into a T, actually. So it's $6.2 trillion in potential capital gains, unrealized, sitting in the markets. And that, again, was a dated stat from 2016. But a couple things that I just want to underscore and then come back to the answer to your kind of market inquiry question. So one piece, just looking nationally, not just in Cleveland. So I think last week, CoStar came out again, looking at the year-on-year transactions and how they've increased or not in opportunity zones. And so nationally, what we've seen is a 12.4% increase in the transaction volume in places that are opportunity zones. Meaning, in 2017, there was a 1 volume of sales. This is a 12 point, so it's 1.12% transactions that we're seeing in opportunity zones. So it is increasingly, we're seeing volume nationally. The question becomes where, right? To your point around those markets that are well positioned for growth. And the top 10 are your usual suspects. So you have your New York, Los Angeles, Oakland, San Diego, Seattle, Portland, Phoenix, Atlanta, right? So when you rewind back to original intent that I was talking about, recognizing that this capital has historically been in these places, how might we get it back into Midwestern states, et cetera, at least in the first pass of where and how we're seeing transactions aggregate, we're seeing them kind of follow these trends. So the good news here is that, and I agree wholeheartedly that this isn't a panacea, nor will it be the only arrow in our quiver. It is a really important one nonetheless. And I think the reason why is that those sites that you see over there that Jerome was talking about at the beginning, there is going to be increasing numbers of people looking for these types of deals in places like this that prior to this program, I have to be honest with you, wouldn't have seen their way to Warrensville Heights, nor in any one of these tracts. So I think that's a really important point, that what you see on this is that, again, this is just what's been publicly announced. I want to come back on a small point. The self-selection is an important point to recognize as well, right? So as an individual that's a high net worth that wants to declare themselves as a fund, it's a one-pager, right? They're telling the IRS and the IRS alone that I am going to defer my gains and I am going to start my own fund. This isn't, I need JP Morgan or I need, First Federal Lakewood or what have you as a, financial institution to really launch a fund. It is a individual that can do that. And why that matters is that this is 72 that have been publicly announced. By no means is there only 72 that intend to form funds. So important disclaimer. So with these 72, what we're seeing is at least $18 billion announced already in funds and capital that's been aggregated across these. And oh, by the way, the 12% increase was a total of $53 billion in transactions above what it was the year before. So the volume here, you're starting to see B's and T's, right? Billions and trillions of dollars available. Now, the reality is what are they looking for? And so the average, I think, was 250 that you see up there. The average size of an opportunity fund that's been announced is about 250 million. And you see the big ones up to $3 billion and the smaller ones at 500,000 to 900,000 that have been announced. So why that matters to me, and I think for what we're hearing as a point of kind of summary here, is to say that there's no doubt uncertainty, but there are some known knowns as well, right? And one of the known knowns is to get that 15% haircut or that deferral, that upside value, you have to actually be in a project by the end of 2019 here, right? And so there is this time sensitivity where we both have uncertainty, which is making the market kind of sit back and wait for final regulations. But we also have some hard baked-in deadlines that are within statute, which is your bill comes due on 2026 at least, right? And to get that 2026 kind of bill to the federal government, and you want to have the 15% discount, haircut, if you will, you have to be in by 2019 to get that 7 years of a hold that gets you your 15%. So why that matters is that you have both the uncertainty and you have the time-bound nature of this program. And I'm increasingly talking with fund managers that are rapidly looking to deploy capital. So yes, those markets, those top 10 that I just said, could absorb a lion's share of this. But I would tell you, deal flow, permitting, and a whole bunch of other zoning issues can't absorb all, let's say, 6.2 trillion, or as Treasury Secretary Mnuchin pegs this at $100 billion program, right? To find the deals ready between now and 2019, that's a tough ask, right? And there's fund managers feeling the crunch, and what we heard, and we may hear again, is that there's folks saying, bring us your deals, because we have to deploy this capital because we're either under a 180-day time frame, or we need to deploy this capital soon. And there was a capital gains event. We've been trying to defer it, delay it. Now that we've had it, showtime, show me where your deals are. To which Jerome and others can lift up these projects and elsewhere to say, we got a shovel-ready project, here are the value propositions, take another look at our city. So I think that's a really important piece. So overall, what we see is that there is a lot of activity that is happening, both announced and kind of quietly as well. And we're in a situation now that cities like Warrensville, regions like the Midwest and Ohio, our question is, can we organize ourselves and provide enough hand-raising opportunity to start attracting capital both nationally and then ultimately locally to really create the right capital stacks to build our community?
Thanks, Kevin. No. I'm not sure how much longer we have, so I just do want to have an opportunity to have David talk about what PNC is doing, because it's really exciting. But what's interesting about, just quickly on the fund and the fund structure, and I guess I consider this more of syndication of deferred capital gains as opposed to actually creating a fund, because as you have seen how it needs to work, you need to take your capital gain and invest it within 180 days. So it's hard to really create a fund of investors that you can then, take those multiple investors and put it into projects. So really what we are seeing, I think, is almost like on a case-by-case basis. You have investors who are harvesting capital gains, and then they are within that 180 days looking for investment opportunities. And we have here with David Eddy and PNC, who's already established a fund within PNC. And so David, I'm going to let you take an opportunity to talk about what PNC is doing. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Yvette. So you'll notice once I get there, that's my slide. That's it, which is great, right? We're sort of time limited, but it's really emblematic literally of the fact that PNC has its own capital gains on balance sheet. So what the rest of that industry that Kevin and Annette talked about was really private equity and real estate equity fund managers launching another fund, generating leads and pipeline of folks from family offices, high net worth individuals who have capital gains to defer, helping walk through the process of explaining to them what is the opportunity zone, just like we did today, and attracting billions and billions of dollars of capital. PNC didn't have to do that because we have hundreds of millions of dollars of capital gains on balance sheet every year. We've also, within the PNC Community Development Bank, for decades been deploying investment capital into new market tax credits, affordable housing tax credits, renewable energy tax credits, historic tax credits. We invest in real estate equity that's community development qualified. We invest in small business loan funds. So we have a team of credit experts that understand how to invest, and we don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's an incredible leg up. So in June of last year, we sort of declared, if you will, that was the start of our 180-day period, and we deployed capital around the country. $33 million of combined investment and loan to date. We're very, very confident that that number is going to increase exponentially this year. And my colleagues and I are out here basically looking for real estate deals, not operating businesses. So we're looking for qualified opportunity zone real estate deals that are also Community Reinvestment Act qualified. So those of you that might be familiar with CRA, I really don't want to dig into that almost 40-year-old piece of legislation, but the simplest explanation is that it requires large national banks to do all of their business in all of their locations. There's no excluding any location, group of folks, neighborhood. It is illegal, and what we've done with that is turned it on its head and taken an opportunity, like the Opportunity Zone, and tried to figure out how could we do even better in communities where we already operate and add this to our toolbox. So quickly I'll walk through the model because the boxes aren't the funnest thing to look at. But the easiest way to think about this is if we were going to do a commercial real estate loan that's also CRA qualified, and we were going to provide 90% of the capital to that specific project, we're going to take that 90% of capital that would have been a standard commercial real estate loan, and we're going to divide that into two pieces. About 75% of that's going to be an opportunity zone investment, and 25% is going to be fully amortizing debt. So that does a number of things. So on the investment piece, it's a 10-year investment of PNC capital that will take the deferral on that gain. We're going to put that capital into the project at 3% interest rate and interest-only payments, no amortization on that 75% of the 90% of the capital. And that is a huge competitive advantage that both in terms of competing against other real estate equity or private equity funds, they're going to have to charge a load. We're at 3% interest only for the vast majority of the project cost. And we're going to fully amortize a small piece of debt. So at the end of the 10-year period, basically, PNC is going to want to get its investment repaid. It's very, very likely that that investment principal will not be repaid but refinanced, probably by PNC, but certainly could be by another bank. So having that smaller piece of debt at the tail end of the project gives us cushion that we have a lot of confidence that as the real estate asset hopefully improves in value a little bit, but maybe not significantly, as Terry mentioned, in some of the Midwestern communities, we should still be able to have a very good opportunity to refinance that, which is great for the developer, great for the community, great for the bank. And we can do another, hopefully, significant investment even at the tail end of the project. So we've really tried to simplify this. Investors and developers or sponsors that are here today that want to catch me afterwards, I'd certainly like to, we can go into more detail. But we've tried to make this another quiver in our toolbox, if you will, of assets that we can really help improve communities. And Warrensville Heights, again, as Kevin mentioned, as maybe for the first time access to really a national caliber set of tools. And PNC is actually, we're very, very pleased and very pleased that we're really gearing this toward community development projects, not just opportunity zone deals that were going to happen anyway. This should be a really great thing for communities too. So that's it.
Thanks, David. Real quick, from my perspective, I kind of look at this again, and we call it the tax benefit. There will be, you can think about it. There'll be investors out there who are in my view, a spectrum of investors. There might be investors who are seeking really the IRR or the return on investment from their investment. And then there will be other investors out there who are looking to make a social impact, again, because this was how the white paper was designed, and there are a lot of investors out there who are looking to do both, make a return on investment, but also make some type of social impact with their investment. And there are those investors out there. So we want to attract all of those investors, and PNC is on the spectrum of, again, achieving the social impact in terms of investing in a CRA. We at Cleveland Development Advisors provide debt financing, and in the model that David is showing here, we're actually working together on a deal that we would play the role of subordinate debt in this particular slide, and so that could come in either to maybe lower one of the stocks or provide. Where the owner is coming in with owner's equity, there could be a piece or a sliver that could come in if it is needed to provide some subordinate debt for a project. But again, because we're mission-based, what we'd like to see is for sure a social impact out of that particular investment. And so that's again another opportunity or another financing source that's available for these projects. Real quick, just to tell you a little bit about kind of what's been going on over the past year and a half from a community standpoint. Again, Paul did an excellent job of getting us started to explain how both the city, the county, some civic organizations, the Greater Cleveland Partners, Cleveland Development Advisors, Fund for the Economic Future, have come together to work on a sort of a collaborative model for the Cleveland or Greater Cleveland market. And so this team has been working again for about a year, starting with the helping to make the recommendations on the census tracts that were ultimately chosen, but working on a number of different things. I'll start sort of clockwise with policy. Again, there's a lot of policy that we're trying to create around the how we attract opportunity zone investors to the market. We also are working with the state you may know, House Bill 727 last year was introduced, and it was an opportunity to provide state opportunity zone benefit to these projects as well. That will likely come back up in the governor's budget this year, so look for that. We'll be working with the state to try to achieve a state level opportunity zone investment. We also, again, this is part of getting this out there, getting this known, the technical assistance and education on the opportunity zone. If we can get it out there and have people understand what it is and how to use it, this community can really benefit by it. Social impact framework. So what we are doing is there is the Gates Foundation actually is funding an organization called the Urban Institute to provide some services to a number of communities around the country, and Cleveland is chosen as one of them, to help to establish a social impact framework. Again, as we look at projects, if we can rank them in terms of the social impact, we can put that rating out there and let investors know that this particular project in Warrensville Heights has this level of social impact, and if you're looking for a social impact investment, here are those types of investments for you. So we're working with some national organizations to pull that together. We're also working on putting together a project portal. So if you have a project or a business that has an interest in attracting opportunity zone investors, we're working to put together a portal where you can put your project into that website, and we'll shoot it out there and get it out there from a national level to, again, attract investors. We're also looking at a local fund. How do we attract, either create a local fund here, an opportunity zone fund, or funds that might incentivize opportunity zone investors or businesses or property owners with their property in an opportunity zone, and then marketing. So we are in the process of developing a prospectus for the community for Greater Cleveland, including Warrensville Heights, and what we're calling the Outer Belt. And you know what? So this might be a good time for me to turn it back over to Jerome. But basically, what this prospectus is going to do is highlight the Northeast Ohio opportunity zones and what's going on in the community. What are the projects that might likely be opportunity zone eligible? And also, this is where the project portal will go onto this marketing document as well, or this marketing website that we will be shooting out and getting out there nationally, so folks can see what's going on in the Cleveland market. And one last thing before I hand it over to Jerome. I don't know if any of you, if you're Opportunity Zone nerds like we are up here, but if you have your Google alert on for Opportunity Zone articles, you probably get a dozen a day like I do. And I got one this week that was from Bloomberg that talked about Portland. And Kevin talked a little bit about Portland today. And in terms of, I think their ranking was basically they were the city that had the highest percentage of investment since 2015 in opportunity zones. And Cleveland ranks as number 2 in that rating structure. So that goes back to, again, how we looked at, or one of the frameworks that we looked at, as Paul mentioned earlier, of how we help to, on a data-driven basis, drive what census tracts sort of qualified for new markets. It was a balance between the need of the census tracts with the investment potential of the census tracts. And I think that particular data set that the Cleveland being second in the nation of that particular investment shows that we're at least on the right track for making this an area where we can attract the most opportunity zones. So, Jerome, I'll turn it back over to you if you want to maybe just end it, maybe talk about your slides on the prospectus, but this will give you an idea of each of those zones that we have in the area. We'll be doing this type of information and marketing for you.